Stonehenge. For centuries, Stonehenge was treated as a puzzle without a purpose, a ring of massive stones on a windy plain, dismissed by early scholars as ceremonial rubble, primitive symbolism, or ritual theater built by people assumed to lack mathematical or astronomical sophistication. That assumption shaped everything that followed. Because if Stonehenge was merely symbolic, it did not need to be understood. It only needed to be categorized, fenced off, and neutralized as harmless mystery. What changes everything is alignment. Stonehenge is not random. Its central axis locks directly onto the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset with a precision that still holds today. This was not guesswork. It required long-term sky observation, horizon tracking, and an understanding of solar cycles spanning decades. The stones functioned as fixed reference points, allowing observers to predict seasonal turning points critical for agriculture, migration, and survival. In effect, Stonehenge operated as a solar calendar built from megaliths weighing up to 50 tons, positioned with intentional geometry. Demonstrations came not from speculation, but from repetition. Every solstice, the sun still rises and sets exactly where the structure predicts. That consistency has been documented, measured, and verified repeatedly. Yet for much of the 20th century, mainstream explanations reduced this to coincidence layered onto ritual. Academic caution framed the builders as spiritually motivated but technologically limited. The implication was subtle but powerful. Advanced astronomical knowledge could not have existed here, not this early. The implications were disruptive. If Stonehenge functioned as an observatory, it meant Neolithic societies in Britain possessed systematic astronomical science thousands of years before classical Greece. That would destabilize the linear narrative of progress, where knowledge flows neatly from Mesopotamia to Egypt to Europe. It would suggest parallel scientific traditions developed independently, then vanished. Suppression did not arrive as destruction, it arrived as reframing. Excavations were narrowly scoped. Interpretations favored ceremony over calculation. Funding flowed toward explanations that preserved the existing timeline. Researchers who emphasized precision astronomy found their conclusions softened, reworded, or buried in academic footnotes. What humanity lost was not Stonehenge itself, but its context. A working model of prehistoric science was reduced to a postcard image. An operational machine for tracking the sky became a tourist monument, and with that reframing, the possibility that advanced knowledge existed and was later forgotten quietly slipped out of reach. Chichen Itza. For decades, Chichen Itza was presented to the public as a ceremonial capital, a religious center built to impress gods rather than to measure nature. Guidebooks spoke of temples and rituals. Textbooks emphasized mythology, but that framing conveniently avoided a more unsettling truth. Chichen Itza was engineered as a working astronomical instrument, one that encoded celestial knowledge directly into stone. At the center of the system stands El Castillo, the stepped pyramid often reduced to an architectural marvel. Its design is anything but decorative. Each of its 4 staircases contains 91 steps. Together with the summit platform, the total becomes 365, the exact number of days in the solar year. This alone implies calendrical intent, but the deeper mechanism appears during the equinoxes, when sunlight casts a precise series of triangular shadows along the pyramid's balustrade, forming the illusion of a serpent descending from the sky. This was not symbolic theater. The effect occurs only on specific days, at specific times, under specific solar angles. The builders understood seasonal cycles, solar declination, and horizon geometry with enough accuracy to lock these movements into stone. Witnesses have recorded the phenomenon consistently, generation after generation. It still functions today, centuries after construction. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges the alignment, but limits its significance. The dominant narrative insists the Maya possessed ritual calendars, not observational astronomy in the scientific sense. Their knowledge is described as intuitive, myth-driven, and isolated. What is rarely emphasized is the scale of data required to design such precision. Decades of continuous observation would have been necessary. Errors would compound quickly. Yet the system works flawlessly. The implications are uncomfortable. If the Maya developed independent astronomical science, complete with predictive models embedded in architecture, then the idea that advanced observational astronomy emerged only in the Old World collapses. Knowledge was not centralized. It was distributed, and later erased. Suppression followed a familiar pattern. Colonial destruction eliminated countless Maya codices. Later, academic gatekeeping reframed what survived as cosmology rather than computation. Research that emphasized mathematical precision struggled for visibility, while ritual explanations were amplified. What was lost was not only manuscripts, but recognition. Chichen Itza became a spectacle, not a laboratory. Humanity inherited the shadow of a serpent, but forgot the science that made it move.
Angkor Wat. For much of modern history, Angkor Wat was described as a religious monument on an almost unimaginable scale, a temple city swallowed by jungle, reclaimed by explorers, then framed as devotional architecture built to glorify kings and gods. That explanation was comfortable. It placed Angkor Wat safely inside the category of belief, not knowledge, and belief, unlike knowledge, does not threaten established timelines. What unsettles that narrative is precision. Angkor Wat is aligned to the equinoxes with remarkable accuracy. On those days, the sun rises directly over the central tower, a visual alignment that only works if the structure is oriented with careful astronomical calculation. But this is only the beginning. Measurements of the temple's dimensions reveal proportional relationships that mirror solar and lunar cycles. Its central axis reflects the movement of the sun across the year, while the spacing of galleries and causeways encodes time itself. This was not metaphor, it was function. Angkor Wat operated as a massive stone calendar, capable of tracking seasons, eclipses, and long-term celestial cycles. Scholars who mapped its geometry found correlations with planetary periods that cannot be explained through coincidence. The builders were not simply honoring the heavens, they were measuring them. Demonstrations came through consistency. The alignments still hold. The equinox sunrise still strikes the tower's peak. The dimensions still correspond to known astronomical periods. These results have been independently verified, yet they remain marginal in public narratives. Mainstream perspectives concede symbolic astronomy but insist the system was primarily mythological. According to this view, numbers had meaning, but not method. That distinction matters, because if Angkor Wat was engineered as an observatory, it implies the Khmer civilization possessed advanced mathematical astronomy centuries before such sophistication is typically acknowledged in Southeast Asia. It challenges the idea that scientific observation flowed only from a few recognized centers of ancient knowledge. The threat was subtle but real. Recognizing Angkor Wat as a scientific instrument would force a re-evaluation of who held knowledge and who later controlled its record. Suppression did not require destruction. It arrived through selective emphasis. Restoration focused on aesthetics. Tourism highlighted grandeur. Academic summaries softened technical conclusions, reclassifying precision as coincidence layered with belief. What humanity lost was continuity. A civilization that tracked the sky with stone left behind a system no longer taught, no longer expanded, and no longer understood in full. Angkor Wat still watches the sun rise, but the science that once watched with it was quietly left behind. Nabta Playa. Long before pyramids rose along the Nile, before dynasties were named and recorded, the desert of southern Egypt held a place that modern history struggled to explain. Nabta Playa was discovered as a scatter of stones in one of the most inhospitable regions on Earth. At first glance, it appeared insignificant. Nomadic debris, ritual leftovers, nothing that challenged established assumptions. That interpretation did not last. Closer examination revealed deliberate design. Stone circles arranged with intent, slabs aligned to specific points on the horizon. When researchers mapped these alignments, an unsettling pattern emerged. Nabta Playa was oriented to the summer solstice, tracking the arrival of monsoon rains critical for survival in the ancient Sahara. Some alignments also appear to correspond with the rising of specific stars, including those associated later with Egyptian cosmology. This was not symbolic placement. It required long-term observation of the sky, an understanding of solar cycles, and the ability to transfer that knowledge into permanent markers. Radiocarbon dating placed the site thousands of years before Stonehenge, making it one of the earliest known astronomical observatories on the planet. That timeline created a problem. Demonstrations were empirical. When solstice light was observed across the stones, the alignments held. When stellar positions were reconstructed backward through time, the correlations matched. Independent teams confirmed the findings. Yet the language surrounding Nabta Playa remained cautious, restrained, almost apologetic.
Mainstream explanations acknowledged astronomical awareness, but avoided the word science. The implications were profound. If organized astronomical observation existed in the Sahara before dynastic Egypt, then the origins of Egyptian knowledge had to be reconsidered. Astronomy, mathematics, and calendrical systems may not have originated along the Nile, but migrated there from older cultures now erased by climate collapse. This possibility threatened a deeply entrenched narrative of civilization emerging suddenly and centrally. Suppression followed quietly. The site received minimal funding. Public exposure remained limited. Discussions of advanced knowledge were softened into discussions of ritual gatherings. The stones were allowed to exist, but not to speak. What humanity lost was ancestry. Nabta Playa suggests that scientific observation may have arisen far earlier and far more widely than acknowledged. A civilization capable of reading the sky was buried not by catastrophe alone, but by silence. And with it disappeared the earliest chapter of humanity's relationship with the stars. Kokino, high above a quiet valley in what is now North Macedonia, a rocky outcrop sat for thousands of years without attracting much attention. When Kokino was finally studied in detail, it was initially labeled a fortified hilltop or a ritual site. That label was safe. It implied symbolism, not precision, and it kept Kokino comfortably outside the history of science. That explanation unraveled when the stones were measured instead of admired. Carved seats, narrow stone markers, and carefully positioned viewing points were found to align with the rising sun on specific days of the year. Most striking were the markers corresponding to the summer and winter solstices, as well as the equinoxes. Even more unsettling were alignments linked to lunar cycles, including the 18-year lunar standstill, a phenomenon requiring long-term observation across generations. This was not casual skywatching. Kokino functioned as a fixed observation platform, designed to track the movement of both the sun and the moon with repeatable accuracy. The carved stone thrones were not symbolic seats of power. They were observation points, positioned so that celestial events could be recorded against permanent horizon markers. When modern reconstructions were performed, the alignments held. Mainstream scholarship acknowledged Kokino as an observatory, but with hesitation. The language remained constrained. Bronze Age people, it was said, possessed astronomical awareness, but lacked formal science. The distinction is subtle, yet critical. Awareness suggests intuition. Science implies method. Kokino demonstrated method. The implications were destabilizing. If structured astronomical observatories existed in southeastern Europe during the Bronze Age, then advanced observational knowledge was not confined to Mesopotamia or Egypt. It emerged independently, in parallel, across regions long treated as peripheral. That undermines the idea of a single civilizational pipeline through which knowledge flowed. Suppression took a familiar form. Kokino was listed, acknowledged, even praised, but rarely taught. Its findings were isolated, not integrated into broader narratives of scientific development. Funding remained limited. Public exposure was minimal. The site existed in academic margins, not textbooks. What humanity lost was continuity. Kokino suggests that complex lunar and solar science once existed in places now considered historically secondary. That knowledge did not disappear because it failed. It disappeared because no institution carried it forward. Stones still mark the sky, but the lineage of understanding they represent was allowed to quietly end. Chankillo, in the coastal desert of northern Peru, stands a structure so explicit in its function that its existence alone challenges how ancient science is framed. Chankillo is not ambiguous. It is not symbolic. It is not abstract. 13 stone towers stretch across a ridgeline in a precise linear sequence, forming what is arguably the most complete solar observatory ever built in the ancient world. Each tower marks a specific position of the sun across the year. From designated observation points, the sun rises or sets over a different tower every few days, tracking its movement between solstices with remarkable accuracy. This system allows the entire solar calendar to be read visually, without instruments, writing, or mathematics, as we define them today. It is functional, it is repeatable, and it still works. Demonstrations leave little room for interpretation. Modern observers standing at the ancient viewing platforms can watch the sun move tower by tower exactly as predicted. Archaeologists have confirmed that this design enabled precise determination of solstices, equinoxes, and seasonal transitions, critical for agriculture and state planning. Unlike other ancient sites where astronomical intent is inferred, Chankillo declares its purpose openly in stone, and yet for decades, it was marginalized. Early excavations focused on nearby fortifications and ceremonial structures, downplaying the solar complex itself. Mainstream narratives acknowledged Chankillo as an astronomical alignment, but avoided fully integrating it into the history of scientific development. The site was treated as an anomaly, not a cornerstone. The implications were uncomfortable. Chankillo predates the Inca by more than 1,000 years. It suggests that systematic, state-level solar science existed in the Americas long before contact with the Old World. That directly contradicts the outdated assumption that advanced astronomical observation developed only in Eurasia and arrived elsewhere late, if at all. Suppression here was not dramatic. There was no destruction. Instead, there was isolation. Chankillo was studied in pieces rather than as a system. Its significance was acknowledged locally, but rarely placed alongside Stonehenge or Egyptian observatories in global narratives. The knowledge was contained, categorized, and prevented from reshaping the larger picture. What humanity lost was clarity. Chankillo shows that ancient civilizations were not guessing at the heavens. They were measuring them with precision, permanence, and institutional support. A complete solar science once stood openly in the desert and was quietly reduced to a footnote, when it should have rewritten the map of human knowledge. Goseck Circle. When Goseck Circle was first uncovered through aerial surveys, it was described as a primitive ritual enclosure, a ring of earthworks and wooden palisades built by early farming communities with little more than symbolic intent. That classification was convenient. It placed the structure firmly in the realm of belief, not calculation, and allowed it to sit quietly in prehistory without demanding deeper explanation. That narrative collapsed the moment its gates were measured. Goseck Circle contains 3 precisely positioned entrances. 2 of them align exactly with the winter solstice sunrise and sunset, not approximately, exactly. The third aligns with true north. This configuration transforms the circle from a gathering space into a calibrated solar observatory, one capable of tracking the most critical turning point of the year, the moment when daylight begins its return. This level of precision was not accidental. It required repeated long-term observation of the sun's path, an understanding of horizon reference points, and the ability to translate celestial motion into fixed architecture. Radiocarbon dating places Goseck Circle nearly 7,000 years ago, making it older than Stonehenge and predating written records of astronomy by millennia. Demonstrations are straightforward and devastating to simplistic explanations. On the winter solstice, sunlight passes cleanly through the southern gates exactly as intended. This alignment has been tested and verified repeatedly. Mainstream archaeology now acknowledges the astronomical function but does so cautiously, often framing it as seasonal awareness rather than structured science. That distinction matters. Seasonal awareness implies instinct, science implies method, continuity, and transmission of knowledge. Goseck Circle shows planning, precision, and standardization, evidence of an observational tradition that existed far earlier than accepted timelines allow. The implications ripple outward. If Neolithic societies in Central Europe were already building calibrated solar observatories, then advanced astronomical knowledge did not suddenly emerge with civilizations like Sumer or Egypt. It evolved gradually, locally, and independently, and was later overwritten by more dominant cultural narratives. Suppression did not erase Goseck Circle. Instead, it diminished its meaning. The site was presented as an isolated curiosity rather than part of a broader prehistoric scientific tradition. Its findings were rarely connected to other ancient observatories. The pattern was broken into fragments, making it easier to ignore. What humanity lost was depth. Goseck Circle reveals that scientific observation of the heavens may be one of humanity's oldest organized behaviors. A knowledge system once rooted in survival and precision was reduced to ritual interpretation, and with that shift, the earliest chapter of human science was quietly pushed back into the shadows.
Jantar Mantar. When Jantar Mantar was constructed in the early 18th century, it was already an anachronism. Massive stone instruments rising into the sky,
at a time when telescopes, lenses, and European observatories dominated scientific prestige. To later historians, this alone became the justification for dismissal. Jantar Mantar was framed as ceremonial, exotic, and ultimately obsolete, a curiosity built too late to matter. That framing collapses under measurement. The instruments at Jantar Mantar were not symbolic replicas. They were functional, hyper-precise devices designed to track celestial motion with extraordinary accuracy. The Samrat Yantra, a towering triangular sundial, can measure local time to within seconds. Other instruments track solar declination, lunar movement, planetary positions, and eclipses, all without optics, electricity, or mechanical parts. This was not experimental speculation. These instruments were used. Observations were recorded. Predictions were made and confirmed. The observatory was commissioned by Maharaja Jai Singh II, who openly challenged European astronomical tables after identifying inconsistencies in their predictions. Jantar Mantar was built not to imitate Western science, but to correct it. Mainstream narratives acknowledge its accuracy, but quietly isolate it. Jantar Mantar is treated as a late cultural expression rather than part of a continuous scientific lineage. Its achievements are admired, but not integrated into global histories of astronomy. The implication is subtle. Real science belongs elsewhere, and this was an exception that arrived too late to influence the future. The implications are uncomfortable. Jantar Mantar proves that large-scale, non-instrumental astronomy not only survived into the modern era but rivaled contemporary European methods. It represents a parallel scientific tradition, one rooted in geometry, architecture, and direct observation rather than lenses and machines. Suppression here did not require erasure. It required framing. Colonial-era scholarship emphasized Europe as the sole driver of scientific progress. Indigenous systems were preserved as monuments, not as methodologies. Jantar Mantar was frozen in time, admired, photographed, and intellectually contained. What humanity lost was synthesis. Instead of merging observational traditions, one lineage was elevated while others were sidelined. Jantar Mantar stands as proof that alternative paths to precision existed, and that global science was narrowed not by accuracy but by power.
Cahokia Woodhenge. On the floodplains near the Mississippi River once stood a city larger than London in its time, yet absent from most historical narratives. At its edge, arranged in wide circular arcs of timber posts, was Cahokia Woodhenge, a structure long dismissed as a ceremonial curiosity until its geometry was finally taken seriously. The posts were not placed at random. From a central observation point, specific posts aligned precisely with the sunrise on the solstices and equinoxes. Each alignment marks a predictable solar event, turning the circle into a working calendar. This system allowed its builders to track the agricultural year with reliability, coordinating planting, harvesting, and civic ritual across a vast population. It was an instrument of governance as much as observation. Demonstrations were unambiguous. When archaeologists reconstructed the circle using original post locations, the alignments held on solstice mornings. The sun rose exactly where the ancient markers predicted. The results were repeatable, measurable, and consistent. Yet for decades, the interpretation lagged behind the evidence. Mainstream accounts favored spiritual symbolism, suggesting the alignments were incidental or secondary to ritual meaning. That explanation falters under scale. Cahokia supported tens of thousands of people. Such a society required precise seasonal coordination. Woodhenge provided it. The system reflects organized astronomical knowledge transmitted across generations, not improvised ceremony. Its builders understood solar motion, horizon reference, and cyclical time with enough clarity to embed that knowledge into city planning. The implications are destabilizing. If North America hosted large urban centers with functional astronomical observatories centuries before European contact, then the narrative of technological absence collapses. Knowledge did not arrive with colonization. It was already here and later dismantled. Suppression followed a familiar route. Timber decays, and with it went much of the physical evidence. What remained was reframed. Early excavations prioritized mounds and artifacts over spatial systems. Academic summaries downplayed scientific function in favor of ritual description. The city itself was reduced to an anomaly, its sophistication quietly minimized. What humanity lost was recognition.
Cahokia Woodhenge reveals a scientific tradition erased not by failure, but by conquest and neglect. An urban society once watched the sun to organize life on a continental scale. The posts are gone now. The alignments survive only in data, and the knowledge that once held a city together was allowed to fade from memory. Machu Picchu, Intihuatana. High in the Andes, carved directly from living granite, sits a structure so precise that its purpose was quietly softened for decades. The Intihuatana stone at Machu Picchu is commonly described as a ritual pillar, a spiritual symbol tied to sun worship. That description is not false, but it is incomplete in a way that matters. The Intihuatana was engineered to function as an astronomical control point. Its carved angles align with the sun during the solstices, casting shadows that behave differently depending on the season. At certain times of year, the stone appears to pin the sun in place, minimizing shadow movement. This effect is not poetic metaphor. It is geometric design. The Incas understood solar altitude, seasonal variation, and horizon calibration well enough to encode that knowledge into a single block of stone. Demonstrations are straightforward. During the equinoxes and solstices, the shadows behave exactly as predicted by the stone's geometry. These effects can be measured, replicated, and verified. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges the alignments, but frames them as symbolic expressions of cosmology rather than operational science. Once again, belief is emphasized over method. That framing obscures scale. Machu Picchu was not an isolated shrine. It was part of a broader Inca system that included horizon markers, sighting lines, and solar temples across the empire. Together, they formed a network for tracking time, seasons, and agricultural cycles across extreme terrain. This was applied astronomy essential for sustaining one of the largest states in the pre-Columbian world. The implications are uncomfortable. If the Inca developed a precise, empire-wide astronomical system without writing, metal tools, or optical instruments, then prevailing definitions of scientific advancement begin to fracture. Knowledge does not follow a single technological path. It adapts. Suppression here was not subtle. It was physical. During colonization, many Intihuatana stones across the Andes were deliberately destroyed, labeled as pagan instruments. Machu Picchu survived largely because it was hidden. The most complete example of Inca astronomical science endured by accident, not preservation. What humanity lost was continuity. The Intihuatana represents a science interrupted mid-sentence. A system that worked was dismantled because it threatened ideological control. Stone by stone, a way of understanding the sky was erased. Across all 10 sites, the pattern is unmistakable. Advanced astronomical knowledge emerged repeatedly, independently, and effectively across the ancient world. Each time it worked. Each time it reshaped society. And each time it was reframed, sidelined, or destroyed, not because it failed, but because power decided which knowledge would survive.